Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's John, and it's also very hard to believe that it is already the 1st of July, 2023. And July means that we are kicking off the third quarter of Historathon 2023. And in this quarter, we're reading history, far and wide, nonfiction, history-related stuff from 1500 to 1820. And I have gathered for you 11 give or take books, including a couple I have absolutely decided to devote myself to, and several more which I know I'll never get to, but I make these videos not just as a record of things I've read, but for things you might want to read too, whether it's for Historathon or not. So first, let me start off with the things I want to read. The first thing that I actually promised Princeton I would read was a book called In Humboldt's Shadow, A Tragic History of German Ethnology. And it's a book about the explorer and polymath Alexander von Humboldt, and the way his work has been maybe misinterpreted or misused in the last couple of hundred years. I thought I had a copy of the book to show you. I know they sent me one, and I know I set it aside somewhere because there's a hole, in Humboldt shadow-sized hole in the library shelf where I had it put away, and now I can't find it. It's in here, I'll read it, it's just I don't have it for this video. But now on to the things that I can actually show you. One thing that I have been waiting all year to read, and I've had it for several years, just have never really had a good excuse to pick it up, is this old thing. Seen it a few times around BookTube. It is Fatal Discord, Erasmus, Luther, and the Fight for the Western Mind by Michael Massing. And this is just, well, in part, it's a dual biography of Luther and Erasmus, from what I understand. But it's also just kind of a heads to tail a summary. Might be a bit of an oversell since this is nearly 1,000 pages. It's probably quite detailed in places, but it was a fascinating conversation going on in the years immediately following the Reformation about how the Bible was going to be interpreted, how Catholicism, now that it wasn't the only form of Christianity, was going to be shaped and proceed throughout history, and that conversation between Luther and Erasmus shaped that history, and it's a fascinating history. I can't tell you too much more about this book. I could talk endlessly about Luther and Erasmus, though. And I was thinking about also maybe supplementing this with either a biography of Luther that I have that I didn't want to get out because I don't want to get out and show 25 books. It's just overkill. Or Norton Critical Editions came out with an edition of In Praise of Folly with a couple of other pieces of Erasmus too, of course, like the Norton Critical Editions too, with the wonderful critical stuff at the end, which I never fail to read because it may not be with the Erasmus volume, but it's always some of the most fascinating stuff in the book. So this is something I want to read along with the Humboldt book. Another book I've had just for ages and have never read. Kind of a classic in its field. This is The Icon of the Axe by James H. Billington. If you are familiar with Billington's name, it's probably as the former Librarian of Congress, which he was for nearly 30 years, through starting with Reagan and going through, oh goodness, I want to say Obama, the Obama years. A long, long, long time Librarian of Congress. And this is basically his interpretation of Russian history. He was an historian of Russia. This is an interpretive history of Russian culture. Includes everything from philosophy, history, art, architecture. It's kind of a catch-all book, but it's also kind of influential. It gets noted in a lot of syllabi for graduate and undergraduate classes in Russian culture, stuff like that. I've heard various things about it. It has pretty good book. It has pretty good Goodreads reviews, though I've heard some people describe it as a little bit catch-all and a little bit unwieldy, which I can imagine it being at nearly 800 pages after notes and appendices and everything. But it also kind of looks like a bit of an education, so maybe. And one of the things I try to do in these lists is create a little bit of a diverse list. So maybe some biography, maybe some cultural history, like the Icon and the Axe, maybe a little bit of diplomatic history, history of science, legal history, etc. So here's some history of science from Princeton University Press. This is Revolutionizing the Sciences, European Knowledge in Transition from 1500 to 1700 by Peter Deere. And this talks about largely a small body of scientists: Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, Newton, and Bacon. Francis, not Roger. And talks about how they sort of crafted what we would recognize as the modern scientific method through use of empirical observation, hypothesis formation, all of the stuff that we sort of assume with or see in modern scientific practice. But those methods are historical, and they have a certain time and place in which they were created, and those people have a large part to do with the story. So this is fascinating. It's also got the virtue of being very short. It's all of 170 pages. So if the philosophy of science interests you, something else to consider. Here is something I bought from online a long time ago, I think. This is The Rights of Peace, The Fall of Napoleon, and the Congress of Vienna by Adam Zamoyski, whose name you might recognize because he also wrote a biography of Napoleon. So when Napoleon was captured and finally exiled in 1814, right at the tail end of our period, there was an 18-month-long fete in Vienna called the Congress of Vienna, in which diplomats of all kinds from all backgrounds, different countries, came together and essentially, it's not an understatement to say, decided the future of what Europe would look like. And this is a history of the Congress of Vienna and what that event looked like. Some of the major decisions that were made, and what Europe was going to do in the wake of someone like Napoleon. fascinating stuff. So in the spirit of diversifying what I'm trying to show you, here's some more Princeton University stuff, press stuff, that this is art history. And this is something that I got in February. Haven't shown you yet, but I wanted to show you because, well, it just fit into the period nicely. And this is Michelangelo, God's Architect, the story of his final years and greatest masterpiece. And this tells the story of Michelangelo and his call by the Pope to be the lead architect at St. Peter's Basilica. He got that call when he was nearly 70 years old in 1546, I think. And he was kind of, at the time, despondent, a little bit depressed that he's coming up on 70 years old, and thought that he might have done everything that he could do. That his creative powers were very likely spent. And the Pope summoned him and asked him if he would like to take charge of this building project called St. Peter's Basilica, which was, at the time when he took charge of it in 1546, was an absolute disaster. It was an architectural failure. It was a failure on many, many different levels. And as it turns out, he was still working on it when he died 16 years later in 1564. Michelangelo died just a few weeks short of his 89th birthday. So he spent pretty much all of his 70s and 80s working on St. Peter's Basilica and directing other people to work on it as well. Looks like fascinating history. I love art history, especially narrative art history, not just photographs. But this does have those, by the way. There's Pope Julius III, by the way, who is the one who commissioned him to take charge of St. Peter's in the first place. I love these color plates. There's St. Peter's Dome right there. But, yeah, if you like art history, something to consider. And this book is also something interesting. It's kind of Roman history and Greek history, but reflected through the American founders. This is a book by Thomas Ricks, who has written some other stuff on much more contemporary history. This is a book called First Principles: What America's Founders Learned from the Greeks and Romans and How That Shaped Our Country. So from what I can tell, it's probably a bit more of a popular book about how the founders read, interpreted, wrestled with the ideas of the Greeks and Romans. So probably a lot of the historians, I'm guessing, some Tacitus, some Livy, some Herodotus, some Thucydides, all of that good stuff. I know a lot about what they got from people like John Locke and Montesquieu, and other people like that, but I know less about what they directly took from the Greeks and Romans. So that would be fascinating to learn about. And here's just a biography I think most people will know about, but it's kind of a big one. But I think everyone's going to recognize the name and the author. This is Darmaid McCullough's biography of Thomas Cromwell. Thomas Cromwell, A Revolutionary Life. Revolutionary beheading is more like it, but hey, you know, sometimes you lose your head in service to the king, right? Okay, so I'm gonna do this. So some history to get us out of the United States and out of Europe. Also have had this for a long, long time. Bought it at Borders back when that was a thing. So that should tell you how long ago this was. The History of the Ottoman Empire, Osman's Dream. The History of the Ottoman Empire by Carolyn Finkel. And this is just sort of a history. I don't know what kind of. It's not exactly a military history. It's not exactly a cultural history, but kind of hits on all the high points, and of course takes you through, the beginning of the Ottoman Empire, which would have been, 1453 when the Byzantine Empire falls, and comes up through the early 20th century. And seems to be a really fascinating takeoff place for learning more about, Ataturk and stuff like that, which is always something I've wanted to learn more about, but haven't. So this might be good background for that. And a long, long time ago, when I was a baby booktuber, maybe even in my late 20s, when I first started my channel, I reviewed a book by this author, who is Perry Miller, called An Errand into the Wilderness. And I thought it was one of the most spectacular things that I had ever read. I still think about it, and I still marvel over it as a piece of just absolute brilliant writing and intellectual history. That's what it is. It's basically and it sounds a little intimidating. It's about the Puritans, intellectual history about the Puritans. I can see people's eyes glazing over already. But it's short, under 200 pages, and just is so good. So good. Touches on the theology of what they thought, power structures within Puritan society, all of that stuff. And this is something I found. Oh, goodness, I can't. Maybe I bought it online. Maybe I did. This is his two-volume New England Mind. The first volume is called The 17th Century. And just so you can sort of get an idea of the stuff he covers, let me just show you the table of contents there. So if you want to pause that and read it, everything from, how Puritanism was largely influenced by Augustinian thought, their intellectual heritage. It's so good. And look at the print. I mean, the print is going to blind me, but it's thorough. And this is volume 1, right? And this is volume 2. This is the New England Mind from Colony to Province by Perry Miller. And let me just show you. Oh God, the print here is even worse. Yikes. Let me just show you the... Can you even see it? I don't know. But this takes you up through... Well, I don't even know if it takes us up through much more recent history. It just covers other topics about Puritan society, other than just their philosophy and their religion. But if you're up for just a big kind of American history read, I mean, these in combination you could easily get through in 3 months, and it would be an education. Every single thing that Perry Miller has written. I have not read these, but I've read a few essays in addition to Errand into the Wilderness and a few portions of other books. And he's great. He's great. He died far too young, in what should have been the middle of his career. But I'll finish off with these. And I hope you got some ideas. If you have any ideas for me that might supplement anything I've already committed myself to, or anything that just interests you, go ahead and leave me a note down below. Don't get a lot of comments in my videos usually, and I love them. I love responding to them if I see them. So let me know what you think, and I will talk to you later. Bye.